The story always begins where the world feels most familiar. For centuries, the 7 deadly sins have stood as an almost universal language of morality. Pride, envy, wrath, lust, greed, gluttony, and sloth. They are whispered in sermons, carved into cathedral walls, woven into medieval art, and even invoked in modern films and novels. The sins endure because they are instantly recognizable. Every generation sees them not as abstract theology, but as daily temptations etched into the human heart. Pride in the mirror, wrath in the clenched fist, greed in the grasping hand, lust in the hungry glance, gluttony in the overfilled table, sloth in the wasted hour, envy in the gaze turned sideways. They are shadows too persistent to ignore, and that is why they became famous. But few ever ask about heaven's reply. If the 7 sins mark the corrosion of the soul, then what stands opposite them? Ancient theologians, mystics, and writers did not leave the question unanswered. They imagined a counterweight, a luminous symmetry of 7 virtues meant to heal what sin corrodes. Humility to temper pride, kindness to soothe envy, patience to restrain wrath, chastity to refine lust, charity to overcome greed, temperance to balance gluttony, diligence to oppose sloth. Together, these qualities form a mirror image of the sins, not as chains but as wings, meant to lift humanity back toward its divine origin. Yet here lies the hidden strand of the tale. Over time, these virtues became more than abstract ideals. They were woven into the very fabric of heaven itself, embodied not just as principles, but as persons. 7 archangels, radiant messengers who do not merely preach virtue but live it, stand as heaven's counterpoint to the powers of corruption. They are the warriors of light, the guardians of balance, the living flames whose presence is meant to remind the world that evil is not the only inheritance humanity carries. It is striking to note how uneven the knowledge of these 2 systems has become. The sins, with their blunt simplicity, survived as cautionary tales, easily dramatized in art and literature. The virtues, quieter and less spectacular, faded into the background. People remember the serpent's temptation in Eden, but fewer remember the angel who kept the gate. They know the dragon cast down by Michael, but not the gentleness of Chamuel who comforts in silence. The sins scream, and so they endure. The virtues whisper, and so they are forgotten. And yet, the forgotten has a strange power. Mystics across centuries have insisted that heaven never leaves the field empty. If there is a shadow, there is also a light. If corruption advances, there must also be a force of restoration. To them, the 7 archangels were not distant figures, but active agents, sent not to dwell in abstractions, but to touch the fabric of human life. They heal the sick, guide the lost, restrain the violent, comfort the brokenhearted, inspire the artist, prepare the prophet, and stand as sentinels against despair. In medieval cathedrals, one can sometimes still see faint traces of this teaching. A stained glass window might show Michael with his flaming sword opposite a panel of Lucifer's fall. Gabriel holds a trumpet where envy slithers in shadow below. Raphael with a staff leans over the sick where gluttony devours feasts. Each pairing is a story in itself. Sin descending, virtue rising, human souls caught in the middle. And in that pairing, the archangels emerge not as decorative figures, but as heavenly responses. Every sin that drags humanity down has a virtue embodied by an angel who lifts it back up. Of course, scholars are quick to point out that the Bible itself never sets out such a clear system. Michael is named. Gabriel appears. Raphael speaks in Tobit. Uriel flashes through apocrypha. The rest come from mystical traditions, oral lore, and centuries of theological imagination. Nowhere in canonical scripture does one find a list of 7 archangels, each matched neatly with a virtue. And yet the system persists, not because it was decreed, but because it resonated. It offered symmetry where life feels fragmented, balance where chaos reigns. People remembered it not as doctrine, but as story. And stories, once planted, grow in unexpected soil. By the Renaissance, the 7 archangels had become fixtures in certain streams of Christian mysticism, Kabbalistic writings, and apocryphal meditations. They stood as a constellation of divine order, 7 stars against 7 shadows. And even as formal theology hesitated to canonize them, the faithful carried them quietly in prayer, art, and imagination. So the tale begins not with what is known, but with what is half forgotten. The sins, loud as ever, remain familiar. The virtues, whispered through the names of archangels, wait like an echo long overlooked. This video follows that echo. It traces the 7 archangels not as abstract myths, but as living forces, embodiments of the very qualities humanity most desperately needs. It explores the way heaven answers when hell corrupts, and how, even in times of despair, there are still figures standing, radiant and unwavering, on the other side of the scale. For every story of pride, there is Michael with humility. For every tale of wrath, Gabriel with patience. For every hunger without end, Raphael with temperance. For every lust that consumes, Zadkiel with chastity. For every greed that isolates, Chamuel with charity. For every sloth that drifts, Uriel with diligence. For every envy that corrodes, Jophiel with kindness. The sins define the battlefield. The virtues reveal that heaven has not abandoned it. This is the mystery that lies ahead, the 7 archangels and the 7 qualities they represent. Not doctrine, not uniform creed, but a tapestry woven through scripture, apocrypha, tradition, and imagination. A tapestry that whispers, in every age, that sin is not the only story humanity carries. Virtue too has its champions, and they are not silent. Before the 7 archangels can be understood as living embodiments of virtue, the ground must be cleared to see how the concept of virtue itself has been framed across centuries. For in theology, not all virtues are the same. They come to us in systems, in lists, in hierarchies, shaped by the concerns of different eras. And just as sins were codified slowly through scripture, sermons, and medieval imagination, so too virtues emerged in different patterns, some philosophical, others mystical, some widely accepted, others lingering in the margins. The earliest Christian thinkers leaned heavily on the inheritance of classical philosophy. Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics had already articulated what they called the cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. These were not theological, but practical, the necessary pillars of a balanced and ethical life. To them, prudence meant clear judgment, justice meant fairness, fortitude meant courage in adversity, temperance meant moderation. The Church Fathers, inheriting both Greek philosophy and Hebrew scripture, found in these 4 a foundation sturdy enough to be baptized into Christian teaching. Augustine, Ambrose, and Aquinas later folded them into theology, setting them as the bedrock of Christian ethics. But Christian faith demanded something beyond philosophy. It pointed to qualities that did not spring from reason alone, but from grace. Thus arose the theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity, sometimes translated as love. These were not merely ethical habits, but divine gifts infused into the soul. Faith to trust, hope to endure, love to give, all rooted in God's initiative. When joined with the 4 cardinal virtues, they formed a complete system of 7, a harmony between human wisdom and divine grace. Yet here lies the complication. While this system shaped much of Catholic theology and later Protestant ethics, it did not provide a one-to-one mirror against the 7 deadly sins. Pride, envy, wrath, greed, lust, sloth, gluttony, these found no neat counterbalance in faith, hope, justice, or fortitude. The symmetry was off. It was like 2 songs in different keys, close but never perfectly aligned. Mystical traditions sought a sharper mirror. Medieval moralists, eager for clarity, began to articulate another set. The 7 heavenly virtues that directly oppose the 7 deadly sins. This list, simpler and more symmetrical, spread easily in art and catechism. Humility for pride, kindness for envy, patience for wrath, chastity for lust, charity for greed, temperance for gluttony, diligence for sloth. Each vice had its antidote, each poison its cure. It was less about abstract theology and more about practical combat for the soul. Where pride whispered, "I am greater," humility answered, "I know my place." Where envy murmured, "I deserve what you have," kindness offered, "Let me lift you instead." It is this second system, clear, sharp, dramatic, that the mystical tradition began to connect with archangels. Not because scripture laid it out, but because imagination craved symmetry. If hell had its 7 temptations, then surely heaven had its 7 guardians. And not just abstractions, but figures of flame and radiance, who stood ready to embody what humans struggled to live. Scholars still debate how firm these associations ever were. Some argue they are purely symbolic, never meant to be taken as literal assignments. Others trace them to the Book of Enoch and later angelologies that cataloged ranks and roles with astonishing precision. In either case, the effect remains. A story framework in which virtues are no longer just ideas, but embodied realities. They have names, faces, swords, staffs, trumpets, scrolls. They enter dreams, appear in visions, intervene in crisis. And it is worth noting how this mirrored system seeped into art. Medieval allegories loved symmetry. If a fresco painted wrath as a raging beast, it would paint patience as a calm figure soothing it. If lust appeared as a fire consuming bodies, chastity appeared as a maiden veiled in light. And over time, artists began to associate these virtues not only with abstract figures, but with angels, sometimes even naming them as archangels. The associations were not uniform, but the pattern was unmistakable. Virtues took on wings. Modern readers may ask, does it matter which system is correct? Theologians might prefer faith, hope, and love. Moralists might prefer humility, patience, kindness. Mystics may prefer 7 radiant archangels, each guarding a virtue. But perhaps the richness lies not in uniformity, but in diversity. The traditions overlap, correct, and complete each other. What one system lacks in symmetry, another supplies in clarity. What one roots in reason, another roots in revelation. And all of them converge on the same point. Sin may be persistent, but virtue is no less enduring. For this story, we will follow the symmetrical path. The 7 heavenly virtues as antidotes to the 7 deadly sins. Not because it is the only system, but because it shines with narrative clarity. Each sin is darkened by a shadow. Each virtue rises as its counterlight. And each light is embodied in an archangel who does not merely speak, but acts, revealing what the virtue looks like in motion. In this way, theology, philosophy, and mysticism all converge, not in abstraction, but in story. As the tale deepens, it is not enough to list virtues. They must be seen through the lives and legends of those who bear them. For the archangels are not whispers on parchment, but forces in history, voices in prophecy, and, according to mystical traditions, guardians still moving in the unseen corridors of the world. They carry humility into battle, patience into prophecy, temperance into healing, chastity into restraint, charity into despair, diligence into slothful silence, and kindness into envy's corrosive gaze. This is the frame we carry forward. Two systems of virtue, one philosophical and theological, the other symmetrical and symbolic. We choose the second not to deny the first, but to illuminate the drama. For a story is always sharper when light and shadow stand face to face. When most people imagine the hierarchy of heaven, their thoughts drift upward to the blazing seraphim or the mighty cherubim, choirs that dwell so close to the throne of God they are more flame than form, more hymn than being. Yet the story of the archangels begins far below those rarefied heights, in what theologians call the third sphere of angels. This is not the sphere of pure contemplation, where spirits sing endless sanctus, nor is it the realm of thrones or dominions who govern the cosmic balance. The third sphere is where heaven bends close to earth. Here dwell angels, principalities, and archangels. The choirs tasked not only with praise but with presence, not only with order but with action. The word archangel itself reveals the paradox. Archi means chief, first, ruling. Angelos means messenger. They are not the highest of all, but among those who carry the greatest weight into the world of men. They are not cloistered in endless worship. They are boots on the ground. When Scripture describes angels who intervene directly, who speak to prophets, wrestle with patriarchs, heal the sick, announce births, it is most often archangels who are moving. Yet here lies a mystery. For all their significance, the canonical Bible names only a few. Michael stands radiant as protector of Israel, his sword raised against the forces of darkness. Gabriel appears as the herald of prophecy, speaking to Daniel, to Zechariah, to Mary, his voice weaving threads of history. Raphael, in the book of Tobit, travels disguised as a companion, binding a demon and restoring a father's sight. Beyond these, silence. Other names, Uriel, Zadkiel, Chamuel, Jophiel, emerge not from canonical scripture, but from apocrypha, mystical traditions, and oral lore. The Book of Enoch, treasured in Ethiopian Christianity but excluded from most Bibles, speaks of 7 who stand before the throne of God, each bearing a domain of judgment, healing, or cosmic order. Kabbalistic writings preserve others, linking them to the Sephirot, the emanations of divine wisdom. And so the tradition widened. Different sects named 5, 7, even 12. Eastern Orthodox mystics spoke of angels whose names were never revealed to the West. Medieval angelologies, eager for order, listed choirs and hierarchies with almost bureaucratic precision. But through it all, one image persisted: the archangels as heaven's instruments, the ones who act when God wills something not only proclaimed, but enacted. They deliver messages, yes, but they also wage wars. They heal the blind, guide the lost, guard nations, stand watch over thresholds of time. They are not vague symbols, but dynamic figures. Michael appears not as a whisper, but as a general in gold. Gabriel does not merely hint, but declares with trumpet clarity. Raphael walks beside men disguised, then unveils his power in mercy. Uriel does not thunder, but warns, his quiet diligence preserving humanity from flood. Each archangel carries not only a name but a role, not only a role but a personality. Some burn with fire, some shine with gentleness, others wait with patience. They are instruments, but not mechanical ones. They are living blades, each tempered differently, yet all wielded by the same hand. To understand why they were linked to virtues, one must imagine their place in the divine economy. If the higher choirs reflect God's ineffable majesty, the archangels reflect his touch. They bend low, they cross thresholds, they enter dreams, they guard nations. They are not far away, but near, weaving heaven into the fragile fabric of history. If sins are experienced daily, then the virtues too must be embodied daily. And so tradition clothed them not in abstract ideals, but in archangels, because archangels dwell where people live, fight, stumble, and heal. Artists through centuries captured this truth. In Byzantine mosaics, archangels are shown with crowns and spears, not passive but poised. In medieval manuscripts, they are drawn as knights, scribes, healers, messengers. Renaissance canvases gave them faces both serene and severe, eyes fixed not on heaven alone, but on the viewer, as if to say, this is not a distant story. This is about you. Their wings are not ornaments, but signals of swiftness. Their armor is not decoration, but readiness. Their gestures are not idle, but purposeful. Scholars debate how much of this is theology and how much is myth-making. Did the ancients intend these figures to carry such weight? Or did later generations embroider them into richer forms than Scripture first allowed? But perhaps the point is not precision. Perhaps the point is resonance. For across Jewish, Christian, Gnostic, and even Islamic traditions, the idea persists that certain angels hold extraordinary stations, moving not only as servants, but as guardians of cosmic thresholds. And whatever their number, 5, 7, 12, the image of 7 has proven most enduring, most symmetrical, most symbolically potent. 7 sins, 7 virtues, 7 archangels. To call them heaven's agents on earth is not metaphor. It is their office. When God wills a message, an archangel speaks. When God decrees judgment, an archangel strikes. When God offers healing, an archangel restores. When humanity strays, an archangel guides. They are not the architects of the cosmos. That is the work of thrones and dominions. They are not the ceaseless praise. That belongs to seraphim. They are the ones who step into dust, into shadow, into battlefield, into sickness, into human history. And therein lies their power. For sin does not dwell only in theory, it dwells in the flesh of life. And so virtue must also be lived not only as theory, but as presence. If heaven intends a reply to the 7 sins, it must be more than concept. It must be embodied in figures who move, who act, who stand. The archangels, heaven's agents on earth, are those figures. They carry the virtues not as words, but as weapons, not as slogans, but as shields, not as platitudes, but as living fire. Across centuries, the human imagination has been drawn toward order. Lists, numbers, symmetries. They help us tame the chaos of memory and meaning. And so it is with the archangels. While Scripture itself names only a handful, tradition gradually expanded the roster, weaving together fragments from canon, apocrypha, mysticism, and folklore until 7 names emerged, standing like luminous pillars before the throne of God. The starting point is simple enough. Michael, the warrior. Gabriel, the herald. Raphael, the healer. These 3 appear with clarity across Jewish and Christian texts. Michael contends with the prince of Persia in Daniel, defends Israel, and leads heaven's armies in Revelation. Gabriel interprets visions for Daniel, announces miraculous births to Zechariah and Mary. Raphael, in Tobit, guides a journey, drives away a demon, and restores sight to a blind man. Together, they form a triad of action: warrior, messenger, healer, already enough to suggest that heaven's involvement in human life is multifaceted. But the story does not end with three. In the Book of Enoch, a text revered in Ethiopia but excluded from most biblical canons, 4 additional names appear. Uriel, the angel of light and wisdom, who warns Noah of the coming flood. Zadkiel, sometimes called the angel of mercy, associated with Abraham's halted sacrifice. Chamuel, linked in mystical traditions to compassion and the search for God. Jophiel, whose name means beauty of God, later imagined as the guardian of Eden's gate with a flaming sword. With these, the number reaches 7, and 7, resonant across scripture and myth alike, takes root. 7 days of creation, 7 lamps of the menorah, 7 seals of revelation. 7 archangels, heaven's full response to earth's 7 sins. The list, of course, was never universally fixed. Eastern Orthodoxy sometimes substitutes names. Jegudiel, Selapiel, Barachiel appear in certain traditions. Some Jewish writings emphasize Metatron, the scribe of heaven. Islamic tradition honors Jibril, Gabriel, Mikael, Michael, Israfil, often equated with Raphael, and Azrael, the angel of death. Gnostic texts preserve still others, each bearing echoes of forgotten cosmologies. Scholars shake their heads at the tangle, unsure whether to call it confusion or richness. But through the shifting currents, 7 names surface again and again, crystallizing around Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Zadkiel, Chamuel, and Jophiel. It is not hard to see why these particular 7 endured. They cover the spectrum of divine activity. Michael embodies protection and justice. Gabriel brings proclamation and prophecy. Raphael restores balance and healing. Uriel carries illumination and diligence. Zadkiel enacts mercy and restraint. Chamuel radiates love and charity. Jophiel inspires kindness and beauty. Together they form a circle, each answering a human need, each opposing a deadly sin, each bearing a virtue like a torch into darkness. Mystical writers embellished the portraits. Kabbalists associated archangels with the Sephirot, mapping their names onto emanations of divine light. Chesed for Chamuel, Gevurah for Michael, Tiferet for Raphael. Christian mystics prayed novenas to them, attributing colors, directions, and elements. In iconography, Michael gleamed with gold, Gabriel in silver or white, Raphael in green, Uriel in red fire, Zadkiel in violet, Chamuel in rose, Jophiel in amber or soft yellow. The colors were not canonical but symbolic, an attempt to give visible form to invisible powers. And if one asks, were they ever real or merely symbolic? The answer depends on the lens. The historian will say their names show how traditions evolved, filling gaps left by sparse scripture. The mystic will say they are presences felt in prayer, companions unseen but not unreal. The theologian will remind us that angelology has always been a blend of revelation and imagination, of what is disclosed and what is inferred. The truth may lie in the overlap, that humanity sought to understand divine care not as vague abstraction, but as particular, personal, named. Thus, 7 names became 7 faces, and 7 faces became 7 stories. Not vague symbols, but archangels each with a voice, a temperament, a weapon or gift. Each would come to be linked not only with a role, but with a virtue. Their very being seen as heaven's embodiment of what humanity must strive to become. It is here the narrative turns. For having set the frame, the sins, the virtues, the place of archangels in heaven's order, and the 7 names most enduring, we can now draw each figure into the light. One by one they stand, not as distant icons, but as living embodiments of virtues that still matter: humility, patience, temperance, chastity, charity, diligence, kindness. And at their head stands Michael, sword of flame, shield in hand, not lifted for pride, but for the power that only humility can yield. Among all the names that echo through scripture and tradition, none stands so tall as Michael. His presence threads across apocalyptic visions, intertestamental texts, medieval prayers, and modern iconography. If the archangels are heaven's captains, Michael is the general. He is remembered as the leader of heaven's hosts, the shield of Israel, the conqueror of the dragon. Yet what makes him formidable is not a thirst for dominance, but the opposite: humility. To see Michael clearly is to understand that heaven's greatest warrior fights not for his own glory, but because he has none to seek. The meaning of his name is itself a declaration: Mikael, who is like God. It is a question, not a boast. A reminder, not a challenge. In that very phrase lies the essence of humility. Pride whispers, "I am like God." Michael's very name rebukes the lie, answering eternally, "No one is." Not Lucifer, who sought to ascend. Not humanity tempted by the serpent's, "You shall be like God." Michael carries that question as a banner into every battle, a truth so simple it pierces through every illusion of pride. In Scripture, Michael's profile emerges in moments of conflict. In the book of Daniel, he appears as a great prince who protects your people, battling cosmic forces that oppose Israel. He is not described in vague terms, but as a commander, rising when others falter. Later, in the Revelation of John, Michael's figure blazes with apocalyptic grandeur. Revelation 12 describes war in heaven. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon, Satan, and his host. There is no bargaining, no compromise, no prideful speech. Michael acts. He casts down. He defends. The serpent falls, not because Michael lusts for power, but because he embodies the uncorrupted will of God. Tradition amplifies this portrait. In early Christian hymns, he is invoked as protector in battle. Byzantine mosaics render him with spear and orb, standing guard over the gates of churches. Medieval Europe crowned him as patron of knights and soldiers, but also of the sick and the dying, those in the final battle for the soul. Pilgrims climbed Mount Saint-Michel in France to honor him, while across the sea, Mont Gargano in Italy became another shrine to his defense. In every image, Michael is clothed not in vanity, but in flame. His armor glows, his sword burns, his shield gleams, not for display, but as symbols of incorruptible duty. The irony is striking. The mightiest of heaven's warriors does not exalt himself. He does not fight because he believes he is strong. He fights because he knows he is small before God, and that knowledge makes him unassailable. Pride corrupts because it blinds. Humility clarifies because it sees. Pride fuels rebellion. Humility secures allegiance. Pride makes one brittle. Humility makes one invincible. Michael embodies this paradox. He cannot be tempted because he does not claim the power as his own. He cannot be swayed because he does not fight for himself. He is, in the truest sense, incorruptible. Mystical traditions deepen this vision. Some writings describe him as holding the scales of justice, weighing souls at judgment. Others associate him with fire, the fire that purifies, not consumes. Kabbalistic lore places him on the side of chesed, mercy, though always balanced with severity. In apocryphal prayers, he is called the archistrategos, the commander of God's armies, yet his authority flows entirely from obedience. His humility is not weakness, but clarity, the sharpness of a sword that cuts through illusion. One can sense his personality in the fragments that remain. He is resolute, commanding, but not harsh. He does not need to shout. His presence silences. He is not the angel of soft whispers or healing touch. That is Raphael. He is not the herald with trumpet. That is Gabriel. Michael is the line drawn, the shield raised, the sword unsheathed. And yet, beneath the steel, humility remains. He does not fight because he hungers to conquer, but because someone must stand when the tide of pride rises, and he is willing. Symbolically, Michael represents something humanity often forgets. The true strength comes not from self-exaltation, but from submission to something higher. In a world where pride shapes politics, ambition, and personal desire, Michael remains a paradoxical reminder. He is radiant in armor, yet bowed in spirit. He leads armies, yet kneels before God. He wields power, yet claims none. This is why he stands as the antidote to pride. Where pride isolates, humility joins. Where pride corrupts judgment, humility clarifies it. Where pride drives rebellion, humility preserves order. Imagine the battlefield of heaven as Revelation describes it. The dragon writhes, angels clash, the cosmos shakes. At the center is Michael, flaming sword in hand, shield raised. Not because he longs for victory, but because he has already surrendered the outcome to God. His power is his humility, and that is what makes him unstoppable. Pride can be broken, tempted, twisted. Humility cannot. To honor Michael is to remember that humility is not timidity. It is not silence born of fear, nor surrender born of despair. It is the courage to kneel, the wisdom to obey, the strength to know one's limits. It is the paradox that the lowest bow becomes the highest strength. Michael's flames do not burn for conquest, but for righteousness. And in his name, who is like God? The question becomes a shield for every soul tempted by pride's whisper. Thus, the first of the seven stands revealed. Michael, the Archangel of humility. Not a warrior because he sought power, but because he renounced it. Not mighty because he exalted himself, but because he knew his place. Pride may dazzle for a season, but humility endures, incorruptible, eternal. If Michael is the sword of heaven, Gabriel is the voice. His presence is quieter, less drenched in flame, but no less decisive. He does not thunder with armies behind him. He enters with a word, a vision, a message that turns the course of history. Where wrath erupts in sudden violence, Gabriel embodies the opposite. Patience, the strength to endure, the clarity to wait, the trust in divine timing. If Michael confronts pride with humility, Gabriel confronts wrath with calmness, fury with stillness. The meaning of his name speaks volumes. Gabriel, God is my strength. Not strength through rage, but strength through composure. In Gabriel's hands, patience is not weakness. It is a discipline that outlasts anger, a calm that steadies worlds. Wrath burns quickly, consuming everything in its path. Patience burns slowly, like oil in a lamp that will not go out. Wrath shouts, patience whispers. Wrath demands, patience trusts. Gabriel's role in Scripture is consistently one of timing. He appears to Daniel, not to fight, but to explain visions, to interpret mysteries beyond human comprehension. His voice brings order to what seems chaotic, clarity to what seems unbearable. Later, he comes to Zechariah, telling of a son who would prepare the way, even though his wife was barren and years had passed. And most famously, Gabriel speaks to Mary, His message does not come wrapped in force or fury. It arrives with patience, the gentle unfolding of God's plan in human flesh. Each moment could have been met with doubt, with wrath at delay, with anger at impossibility. But Gabriel's calm presence reminds, wait, trust. In time, all will be revealed. Tradition magnifies this role. In Islamic lore, Gabriel, Jibril, is the angel of revelation, transmitting the Quran to Muhammad over years of patient dictation. In Christian art, he is depicted with lilies, symbols of purity, or with a trumpet, herald of final things. Some mystics place him at God's left hand, opposite Michael on the right. Word and sword, patience and power, each necessary, each incomplete without the other. Where Michael represents the sudden clash, Gabriel represents the long endurance. One strikes, the other sustains. The virtue he embodies, patience, stands directly against wrath. Wrath demands instant satisfaction, instant justice, instant release. It is the voice that says, now or nothing. But patience trusts that timing belongs to God, not man. It waits, not in apathy, but in confidence. It endures, not because it cannot act, but because it knows when to act. Wrath blinds judgment. Patience clarifies it. Wrath corrodes relationships. Patience restores them. Wrath fractures communities. Patience heals them. Visually, Gabriel is often imagined robed in white or silver, radiant but gentle, carrying a trumpet or a scroll. He does not blaze like Michael or terrify like Uriel. His strength lies in calmness, in clarity. If one imagines wrath as a storm, Gabriel is the stillness that follows, the light that breaks through after the thunder has spent itself. His eyes in art are steady, not piercing but compassionate. His presence conveys not intimidation, but assurance. A reminder that divine justice is not rushed, and divine promises are never forgotten. Consider how his personality shines through in Scripture. When he speaks to Zechariah, who doubts, Gabriel does not explode in fury. He answers with a measured consequence, silence until the child's birth. Not destruction, but discipline. When he speaks to Mary, he does not overwhelm her. He reassures, do not be afraid. In a moment that could have induced terror, Gabriel embodies patience, walking her through revelation step by step. He does not shout, he steadies. Mystics often describe Gabriel as embodying the virtue of patience, not only in his messages, but in his very demeanor. Unlike Michael, who acts in the heat of battle, Gabriel waits for the precise moment. He appears not constantly, but selectively, at crossroads where history turns. His timing is never late, never hurried, always exact. That patience is his strength. Symbolically, his role extends even to the end of time. Many traditions imagine Gabriel as the one who will blow the trumpet at the final judgment. Not in panic, not in wrath, but in calm authority. The moment has come, and nothing can delay it now. Patience, at its end, gives way to fulfillment. The trumpet is not rushed. It is sounded at the appointed hour. To see Gabriel as the antidote to wrath is to remember that patience is not passivity. It is the refusal to be mastered by anger, the courage to wait when fury demands eruption. In a world where rage dominates politics, media, and personal life, Gabriel's presence is a rebuke and a comfort. His message is not do nothing, but wait for the right time. He reminds us that restraint can be stronger than release, and that trust can be more powerful than rage. Thus, the second of the seven stands revealed, Gabriel, the Archangel of patience. He does not conquer with sword or flame, but with timing, with endurance, with trust in the one who governs all. Wrath may burn hot, but patience burns long. And in Gabriel's steady hand, that long fire becomes divine strength, a calm that holds the world together when it trembles on the edge of chaos. If Michael is remembered for the clash of battle and Gabriel for the calm of proclamation, Raphael steps onto the stage with a gentler but no less essential gift: healing. His very name declares it. Raphael, God heals. He is the physician of heaven, the companion who walks alongside, the angel whose presence restores what excess has broken. And the virtue he embodies is temperance, the quiet balance that resists gluttony's endless hunger. In the apocryphal book of Tobit, Raphael's role unfolds with intimacy. Disguised as a man named Azarias, he journeys beside Tobias, guiding him with quiet wisdom. When a fish rises from the river, Raphael instructs him to keep its organs, for they will drive out a demon and heal blindness. Later, the young man uses them exactly so. The demon tormenting Sarah flees, and Tobit's blind eyes open. These acts are not spectacles of fire or armies, but careful, measured interventions, healing not only a family's body, but its lineage, its hope, its future. In every gesture, Raphael displays temperance, knowing when to act, when to wait, when to apply just enough, never more, never less. Temperance, at its heart, is balance. It is not denial, nor is it indulgence. It is the wisdom to say enough, the ability to recognize when desire has crossed into destruction. Gluttony consumes without thought, devours without restraint. It is the endless hunger that can never be filled. Temperance answers with moderation, with appreciation, with discipline. It teaches not abstinence from joy, but the capacity to savor it rightly. In Raphael's hands, temperance is not a chain, but a cure, the medicine that heals the excesses of appetite. His symbols reflect this. In art, Raphael is often depicted with a staff, marking him as a guide, or with a fish, recalling the story in Tobit. Sometimes he wears green, the color of life and renewal. He does not carry a flaming sword or trumpet, for his strength is not in force, but in restoration. He is the angel of measured steps, of deliberate care, the one who reminds humanity that health of body, mind, and soul comes not from taking more, but from finding balance. His personality, glimpsed in Tobit, is nurturing and calm. He does not dominate his companions, but walks with them, correcting gently, advising quietly. He reveals himself not with blinding radiance, but with humility, waiting until his work is complete before unveiling his true nature. In this, Raphael embodies what temperance means, a presence that is steady, subtle, never overwhelming, but always guiding toward wholeness. Mystical traditions expand his role. Some associate him with the element of air, with journeys and transitions, both physical and spiritual. Others link him to the east, the direction of sunrise, symbol of beginnings and clarity. Kabbalistic writings place him within Tiferet, beauty and harmony, balancing extremes. In all cases, his nature is the same: to heal by restoring balance, to guide by aligning the parts, to sustain by tempering desire. Symbolically, Raphael's connection to temperance speaks deeply to modern life. In an age of endless consumption, food, wealth, entertainment, information, gluttony is no longer confined to tables. It becomes a cultural condition, a constant hunger that devours time, attention, and peace. Raphael stands as a rebuke, not through judgment, but through healing. He whispers, "Pause. Breathe. Enough." He does not shame the appetite, but guides it into harmony. He reminds that joy is not found in devouring more, but in appreciating what is already given. Imagine his presence alongside the weary. A traveler too exhausted to continue finds Raphael at his side, slowing the pace, teaching rest. A soul overwhelmed by desire finds him redirecting hunger into gratitude. A heart blinded by excess discovers clarity in his gentle guidance. Where gluttony blinds with too much, Raphael restores sight with just enough. His virtue does not quench desire, it sanctifies it, allowing humanity to enjoy without being consumed. In Revelation, though his name is not directly mentioned, his essence lingers. After judgment, when wounds are raw and the world waits for renewal, healing is needed. Someone must bind the broken, soothe the scorched, restore what is left. That is Raphael's work. Not the one who smites, but the one who mends. Not the one who shouts, but the one who steadies. Thus, Raphael embodies temperance as the antidote to gluttony. Against the endless hunger that devours, he offers balance. Against the appetite that blinds, he restores sight. Against the excess that wounds, he heals. He is heaven's physician, carrying not only medicine, but wisdom, reminding humanity that wholeness is not found in more, but in enough. If Raphael is remembered as heaven's gentle physician, then Zadkiel enters as the angel of restraint, the guardian of sacred boundaries. His name, often translated as Zadkiel, righteousness of God, carries within it the essence of fidelity, purity, and mercy. While Scripture does not list his deeds as directly as Michael's or Gabriel's, tradition remembers him most vividly in one moment: the binding of Isaac. When Abraham raised the knife, trembling with obedience, it was Zadkiel who intervened, staying the hand, preserving the child, and proving that devotion to God does not demand destruction, but reverence. In that instant, chastity was revealed not as denial, but as sacred restraint. Chastity, misunderstood in modern ears as mere abstinence, is far richer in its spiritual sense. It is the virtue that opposes lust, not because it despises the body, but because it honors it. Lust seeks to consume, to use, to reduce another into an object of fleeting desire. Chastity remembers that the body is a temple, intimacy a covenant, love a communion. It is reverence clothed in discipline, a fire contained, so it may give warmth rather than burn unchecked. Zadkiel embodies this truth, his presence a reminder that love elevated is more powerful than desire unleashed. In mystical traditions, Zadkiel is sometimes linked to the violet flame, an image of purification and transformation. Just as violet light burns at the edge of perception, chastity too exists at the boundary between passion and restraint, between desire and devotion. The flame purifies without destroying, lifting what is base into what is sacred. Through Zadkiel, chastity becomes not repression, but transfiguration, turning the impulse to consume into the will to cherish, transforming fleeting lust into enduring love. Artists depict him differently than the warrior Michael or the herald Gabriel. Zadkiel often wears flowing robes, sometimes holding a dagger sheathed or a chalice raised. The dagger recalls Abraham's halted sacrifice, a weapon withheld rather than wielded. The chalice speaks of offering, but offering sanctified love poured out in reverence rather than lust, consumed in haste. His face is calm, his demeanor steady, less a blazing warrior, more a gentle sentinel. Personality emerges in his restraint. He is not silent because he is weak, but because he knows when silence speaks louder than words. He is not inactive because he fears, but because he chooses carefully when action must be taken. Where lust rushes forward blindly, Zadkiel pauses, discerns, and preserves. He does not shame the tempted. He lifts them higher. He does not condemn passion, he sanctifies it, reminding that desire can be holy when guided by love rather than possession. Symbolically, his intervention with Abraham crystallizes the virtue of chastity. The binding of Isaac was not only a test of obedience, but a revelation of restraint. God's covenant would not be sealed in bloodlust, but in mercy. Zadkiel's hand halted the knife, proving that true devotion does not destroy life. It protects it. In that act, chastity was revealed. Passion tempered by reverence, obedience shaped by love. The contrast to lust could not be clearer. Lust consumes and forgets. It takes without thought for the soul within the body. It reduces intimacy to transaction. Chastity, in Zadkiel's care, remembers. It remembers that the human body is sacred. That intimacy is covenant, not conquest. That love, when guided by reverence, becomes eternal rather than ephemeral. Lust burns out. Chastity endures. Lust enslaves. Chastity liberates. Lust degrades. Chastity exalts. Mystical writers associate Zadkiel with mercy as well. To restrain the knife at Moriah was not only chastity but compassion. To turn Abraham's zeal into reverence was not only obedience but mercy. In Zadkiel, mercy and chastity become inseparable. Both require restraint. Both require seeing the other not as object but as beloved. Modern readers might ask, what relevance can chastity have in a world that celebrates indulgence? But in truth, the hunger for sacred love is deeper now than ever. In a culture where desire is marketed, commodified, and consumed, Zadkiel's presence is a reminder that love is not meant to be cheapened, that the body is not a product, that the soul is not a footnote to passion. His flame calls humanity not to rejection, but to reverence, not to repression, but to remembrance. Imagine him standing unseen at thresholds of human intimacy, whispering not do not love, but love rightly. Whispering not turn away, but look deeper. His virtue is not the absence of fire, but the sanctification of it, a flame that illuminates without devouring. Thus Zadkiel embodies chastity as the antidote to lust. Against the desire that consumes, he offers reverence. Against the hunger that degrades, he offers respect. Against the passion that forgets, he offers remembrance. He is the angel of restraint, of transformation, of sacred fire. And in his hand lies the violet flame, a light that does not scorch but sanctifies, lifting love into the realm of the eternal. If Zadkiel represents restraint at the edge of passion, Chamuel enters as the warm presence of compassion, the angel of charity. His name is often interpreted as Chamuel or Chamuel, he who sees God, or he who seeks God. In that translation lies his essence: to see the divine in others, to seek the divine through love freely given. Where greed clutches, Chamuel opens his hands. Where greed isolates, Chamuel moves closer. Where greed hoards, Chamuel gives. Greed, among the 7 deadly sins, is perhaps the most insidious because it cloaks itself as security, ambition, or even prudence. It whispers that worth is measured in what we possess, that safety comes from accumulation, that love can be bought or earned. But in truth, greed always takes more than it gives. It builds walls, isolates souls, hardens hearts. It transforms abundance into hunger until nothing is ever enough. Against this endless craving, charity shines as its perfect opposite. And Chamuel, according to mystical traditions, embodies that charity. Legends describe Chamuel as the angel who comforted Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Whether literal or symbolic, the image is profound. In the darkest hour, when fear pressed and betrayal loomed, Chamuel knelt beside the Son of Man, not to remove the cup, but to offer presence. That is charity in its purest form, not pity, not performance, but solidarity. Love that does not withdraw when the night deepens, but leans in with quiet strength. Artists render Chamuel differently than the blazing warriors. His depictions often glow in gentle rose or pale gold, colors of affection and warmth. His heart, radiant, is sometimes shown as a light upon his chest, symbolizing compassion made visible. He does not brandish a sword or trumpet, but extends open arms, a chalice, or a flame of kindness. His beauty is not fierce but soft, the sort of beauty that soothes rather than startles. His personality, as described in mystical writings, is gentle but not naive. Chamuel's charity is not weakness, it is clarity. He sees suffering without flinching. He faces greed without envy. He offers when others withhold. To love selflessly requires strength, for it refuses the instinct of self-preservation. Charity is courage, the courage to risk vulnerability for the sake of another. Chamuel embodies this courage, standing as the antidote to greed's cowardice. Consider how charity transforms greed's patterns. Where greed isolates, charity builds connection. Where greed clings tightly, charity opens its hands. Where greed makes others into rivals, charity makes them into companions. Chamuel's influence in mystical traditions is often invoked in prayers for reconciliation, for healing relationships, for dissolving resentment. He is the angel of restoration, not through conquest, but through compassion. Kabbalistic traditions link him with the Sephirah of Geburah, or sometimes Chesed, the spheres of divine love and strength. His role is to draw humanity toward the heart of God, not through fear, but through tenderness. He is described as one of the closest angels to the divine heart, not because he commands armies, but because he mirrors the eternal love of God. In this sense, charity is not only an ethical choice, but a reflection of heaven's deepest reality. Imagine Chamuel in a modern context, a society fractured by greed, financial, political, personal, finds itself driven by competition. Chamuel's presence interrupts the spiral, whispering a different question, not "What can I gain?" but "What can I give?" He stands beside those who feel abandoned, reminding them that love still moves unseen. He leans near the broken, the forgotten, the outcast, offering the simplest yet hardest gift, presence without demand. This virtue, charity, opposes greed not by force, but by dissolving it. Greed cannot survive where love is freely given. It shrivels when generosity flows. Chamuel's role, then, is not only to represent charity, but to enact it, to remind that divine love is not earned or purchased, but given without price. At Gethsemane, charity meant presence in agony. In daily life, charity means the open hand, the listening ear, the gift uncounted. In eternal terms, charity is what binds creation to Creator, the thread of love woven through all being. Chamuel's name, he who sees God, reveals why. To see the divine is to love without condition. Thus, Chamuel embodies charity as the antidote to greed. Against the grasping hand, he offers the open palm. Against the hunger for possession, he offers the courage of selfless love. Against the walls of greed, he builds bridges of compassion. His presence whispers to the heart, generosity is not loss, it is gain. For in giving, one does not become less. One becomes more fully human, more fully alive, more fully aligned with the God who is love itself. Among the archangels, Uriel is perhaps the most enigmatic. His name means Uriel, God is my light. He is less celebrated in liturgy than Michael or Gabriel, less familiar in iconography than Raphael. Yet, in mystical traditions, He shines as the scholar, the strategist, the watchful flame that never wavers. Where sloth tempts the soul to drift into apathy, Uriel embodies diligence, the patient, tireless perseverance that holds fast to truth and purpose. In the apocryphal Book of Enoch, Uriel plays a striking role. He is the one who warns Noah of the coming flood, giving humanity a chance to prepare for judgment. This act reveals his essence, not spectacle, not fury, but foresight. Diligence is not frantic labor, it is sustained awareness. It is the willingness to see what others overlook, to act when others are paralyzed, to keep watch when others fall asleep. Uriel embodies this vigilance. He is the lantern at the edge of night, the scholar bent over the scroll long after others have laid it aside. Sloth is more than laziness. It is spiritual inertia, the refusal to engage, the surrender to despair or distraction. It is the sin that whispers, "Why bother?" Left unchecked, it corrodes hope and hollows the soul. Diligence is its opposite. Not a burst of energy, but a flame that endures. Uriel's virtue is precisely this endurance. He reminds humanity that every act of attention, every moment of persistence, every choice to remain faithful matters. In art and mystical writings, Uriel is often clothed in fiery robes, scroll or book in hand, eyes like coals that see through darkness. He does not arrive with trumpet or sword, but with insight. He perceives patterns before they unfold, dangers before they strike. Where others slumber, Uriel studies. Where others give up, Uriel presses on. His power is not loud, but inexhaustible. The kind of strength that outlasts storms simply by refusing to be extinguished. His personality is often described as serious, focused, almost severe. He is not aloof, but he is not soft either. He does not console with gentle words. He steadies with hard truths. When Noah was warned, it was not with sentimentality, but with sober reality. The flood is coming. Prepare. In that, diligence becomes not only labor, but courage. The courage to face what others ignore. Mystical traditions tie Uriel to the element of fire, not the fire that consumes, but the fire that illuminates. In some Kabbalistic systems, he is linked to the Sephirot of Malkuth or Hod, associated with divine order and intellect. Christian mystics saw him as the angel of wisdom, the one who interprets prophecies and reveals the hidden. Some even call him the angel who guards the gates of Eden with a sword of flame, though others attribute that to Jophiel. Whether scholar, sentinel, or seer, the theme is constant. Uriel does not sleep. To imagine Uriel is to see the antidote to sloth. Sloth hides from responsibility, Uriel leans into it. Sloth shrinks back from truth, Uriel shines it. Sloth lets time slip away unnoticed. Uriel redeems it with persistence. His very presence is diligence, reminding that faith is not proven in grand gestures, but in the quiet, steady light that refuses to go out. Symbolically, his role in Revelation is profound. While not explicitly named in the canonical text, later traditions imagine him guiding the upheavals of sun, moon, and stars as seals break and trumpets sound. Cosmic order trembles, but Uriel's flame holds steady, illuminating the hidden meanings of the end. He is not the angel of sudden judgment, but of watchful revelation. His diligence ensures that nothing is forgotten. No deed escapes notice, no truth remains hidden. In the modern world, Uriel's presence whispers against the apathy of an age overwhelmed by distraction. He reminds that diligence is not glamorous, but essential. To study, to work faithfully, to endure when enthusiasm fades. In prayer, he is invoked for clarity of mind, perseverance in vocation, steadfastness in faith, he is heaven's scholar and strategist, and his virtue is the lamp that does not flicker. Thus Uriel embodies diligence as the antidote to sloth. Against the sin that surrenders to inertia, he stands unyielding. Against the drift into apathy, he burns with unwavering flame. Against the temptation to give up, he persists. He is the angel of endurance, the light that holds when all else fades. And in his steady gaze, humanity is reminded. To remain faithful in small things is often the greatest battle of all. If Uriel burns with the steady fire of diligence, Jophiel glows with a gentler radiance, the beauty of kindness. Her very name, Jophiel, means beauty of God. Among the seven, she is perhaps the softest in demeanor, yet her strength lies not in force, but in the quiet power to lift others rather than compete with them. Against envy, the sin that corrodes by comparison, Jophiel stands as the embodiment of kindness, the virtue that delights in the good of another and transforms jealousy into joy. Envy whispers, "Why not me? Why them?" It measures worth in relation to others, turning blessings into resentments. It twists admiration into bitterness, love into rivalry. Left unchecked, envy isolates the soul, turning every success of another into a wound. But kindness answers differently. It says, "I see your light, and I celebrate it." Where envy claws at what others have, kindness adds to it, multiplies joy rather than subtracting it. Jophiel embodies this spirit, her beauty not merely visual, but moral, a radiance that lifts hearts without diminishing them. In mystical traditions, Jophiel is sometimes identified as the angel who stood at the gates of Eden after humanity's exile, wielding the flaming sword, while scripture names only cherubim for this role. Later Lors places Jophiel there, not in wrath, but in sorrowful guardianship. Her flaming sword was not a punishment, but a protection, ensuring that humanity could leave paradise with dignity and begin again. In that image lies her essence. Kindness is not sentimental. It is strong, protective, and deeply intentional. Art depicts her in flowing garments of gold or soft amber, surrounded by flowers, scrolls, or radiant patterns. Unlike Michael's armor or Gabriel's trumpet, her symbols are delicate yet profound. Art, wisdom, beauty. Some traditions even connect her to inspiration, guiding artists and thinkers, reminding humanity that beauty itself can be a form of kindness, a gift that uplifts rather than competes. Where envy tears down, beauty builds. Where envy isolates, creativity connects. Her personality, as described by mystics, is patient and empathetic. She listens without judgment, she perceives without envy. When others burn with jealousy, she soothes with reassurance. You too are beloved, you too have worth. She does not silence pain with platitudes, but meets it with gentle truth. To those who feel overshadowed, she whispers, "The light of another does not diminish your own." This is the heart of kindness, not denial of difference, but joy in shared light. Symbolically, Jophiel's kindness strikes at the root of envy. Envy thrives in scarcity, the belief that if another shines, we must dim. Kindness operates in abundance, the belief that every light increases the glow. When one artist paints, Jophiel inspires another. When one soul succeeds, Jophiel reminds others to rejoice. Her beauty is not possession, but presence, a loveliness that exists not to dominate, but to inspire. In mystical writings, she is often associated with wisdom as well, sometimes guiding Adam and Eve after their exile, teaching them how to live outside paradise. If true, her role was not only to guard what was lost, but to help humanity move forward. Kindness becomes not mere sweetness, but resilience. The ability to face loss without bitterness, to face another's gain without resentment. Imagine her in modern life, where envy thrives in the endless comparisons of social media, status, and competition. Jophiel's presence interrupts the cycle, whispering that beauty is not measured against others, but revealed in itself. She stands beside the jealous heart and invites it to celebrate, to see the divine in another without feeling diminished. Her kindness transforms envy's corrosive gaze into vision that sees the beauty of God reflected in all. Thus, Jophiel embodies kindness as the antidote to envy. Against the whisper, "Why not me?" she offers the declaration, "I see you and I rejoice." Against the corrosive hunger to possess, she offers the open hand of affirmation. Against the rivalry that isolates, she builds connection through empathy and beauty. She is the angel of kindness, her sword not a weapon of conquest, but a flame that protects, inspires, and heals. In her, kindness is revealed not as weakness, but as the most disarming force of all. For cruelty may wound, envy may corrode, but kindness interrupts both. It lifts the fallen, celebrates the successful, heals the overlooked, and in Jophiel's radiant presence, envy loses its sting, replaced by joy in the truth that beauty multiplies rather than divides. One by one, their faces have stepped into view. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Zadkiel, Chamuel, Uriel, Jophiel, each bearing a name, a story, a virtue. Yet their true power is not found in isolation. It is found in their harmony. Together, they form what mystics called the heavenly architecture, a living pattern through which divine order touches the broken world. They are not 7 fragments, but 7 beams of the same light, refracted into colors humanity can understand. Picture them not as separate statues standing apart, but as pillars supporting the same great temple. Each one holds a corner of the weight. Remove Michael, and pride runs rampant. Remove Gabriel, and wrath consumes unchecked. Without Raphael, excess devours. Without Zadkiel, desire corrodes. Without Chamuel, greed hollows the heart. Without Uriel, apathy smothers. Without Jophiel, envy poisons joy. Alone, each sin may dominate. Together, each virtue counters. The 7 archangels stand not as individual champions, but as a circle of guardians, heaven's full answer to hell's full assault. Mystical writers often describe them in symmetrical balance. Michael and Gabriel, sword and word, humility and patience, like twin guardians at the gates. Raphael and Zadkiel, healing and restraint, balancing appetite and passion. Chamuel and Uriel, charity and diligence, binding the heart and the mind in love and endurance. At the center, Jophiel, kindness and beauty, illuminating them all with a light that transforms rivalry into harmony. The structure is less a ladder and more a mandala, less a hierarchy and more a constellation, each point necessary for the whole. Theologians may hesitate to canonize such symmetry, but the symbolism speaks with its own authority. Just as the 7 sins represent a comprehensive corruption of the human soul, so the 7 virtues embodied in the archangels represent a comprehensive restoration. Together, they whisper that nothing is left unguarded, no wound unhealed, no temptation without its answer. Heaven's care is total, its reply complete. Their unity also reflects a deeper mystery. Virtues are never solitary. Humility without patience falters. Patience without charity withers. Charity without diligence weakens. Each virtue depends on the others, each incomplete alone. The archangels, in embodying them, reveal this truth. Michael cannot fight alone without Gabriel's calm. Raphael's healing needs Zadkiel's reverence. Chamuel's charity grows strong beside Uriel's endurance. Jophiel's kindness shines brighter when reflected in all. Together, they reveal that virtue is not a single act, but a woven fabric, a harmony of qualities that sustain the soul. Art and tradition often hinted at this unity. In Byzantine mosaics, groups of 7 archangels appear together, not scattered but arrayed before the throne, equal in stance, united in gaze. In Kabbalistic diagrams, they radiate from the divine center, each tied to another by lines of balance. In medieval manuscripts, they were painted around Christ or the Virgin, 7 flames circling a central light. The message was clear. These were not rivals, but companions, not fragments, but parts of a design. Their presence together also reminds us that heaven's architecture is relational. Virtues are not abstract qualities hovering in the air. They are ways of being in relation to others. Humility shapes how we meet pride, patience how we meet wrath, kindness how we meet envy, charity how we meet greed, temperance how we meet hunger, chastity how we meet desire, diligence how we meet inertia. Each is lived in the space between souls, and each is guarded by an archangel who leans into that space, ensuring humanity is never left alone. Symbolically, the 7 archangels as a living architecture mirror the 7 lamps of the menorah, the 7 days of creation, the 7 seals of revelation. 7 is never arbitrary. It signals fullness, completion, the circle unbroken. If sin fractures, 7 archangels restore. If sin isolates, 7 archangels reconnect. If sin leaves the soul in ruins, 7 archangels rebuild the temple, each one a pillar, each one a flame. In this way, their unity is not only theological, but profoundly human. For just as no virtue stands alone, no human life stands alone. We need humility to ground us, patience to steady us, temperance to balance us, chastity to refine us, charity to expand us, diligence to sustain us, kindness to soften us. The 7 archangels remind us that life is not won through a single quality, but through harmony, through architecture built strong and beautiful, where every pillar has its place. Thus the 7 stand, not only as individual figures, but as a chorus, a constellation, a living cathedral of virtues. They reveal that heaven's answer to hell is not only power against power, but harmony against chaos, order against corruption, wholeness against fracture. They are the architecture of heaven reflected on earth, reminding every soul that for every shadow, a light stands ready, and for every sin, a virtue still endures. The story of the 7 archangels would not be complete without turning to the final book of Scripture, the Revelation of John. Here, the curtain of history is drawn back, and the great cosmic drama is unveiled. Beasts rising from the sea, stars falling from the sky, thrones set in judgment, and the clash between heaven and hell brought into full view. If throughout history the archangels acted quietly, delivering messages, healing, guiding, protecting, in Revelation, their presence becomes thunderous. They are no longer only companions or healers. They are instruments of judgment, heralds of the end, warriors of fire and light. At the center stands Michael. Revelation 12 describes a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon, the ancient serpent identified with Satan. It is a battle not metaphorical, but cosmic. Heaven itself shakes. The dragon and his host are defeated, cast down to earth, and the voice in heaven cries, "Now salvation and power and the kingdom of our God have come." Michael is not victorious because he is clever or because his sword burns brighter. He triumphs because he fights with humility, uncorrupted, aligned perfectly with the will of God. Pride had cast Lucifer down. Humility lifted Michael up. And thus, in the final war, the very virtue he embodies, humility, is the weapon that seals the dragon's fate. Gabriel, though not named explicitly in Revelation, is felt everywhere. The 7 trumpets that release waves of judgment, hail and fire, poisoned rivers, darkened skies, swarms of locusts, carry Gabriel's tone. If Michael is the general, Gabriel is the herald, marking each stage of the apocalypse with sound that cannot be silenced. Wrath burns quickly, but patience endures, and Gabriel's role as announcer reveals divine timing even in judgment. The trumpets sound not in chaos, but in sequence, measured, deliberate, patient. Raphael's presence too is hidden yet essential. In a vision drenched in plagues and suffering, healing will be needed. The scrolls break, bowls of wrath are poured. But when the storm subsides, who tends the wounded world? Tradition whispers Raphael's name. The angel of temperance and balance must walk amid the ruins, restoring what excess has shattered. Healing is as much a part of judgment as punishment, for divine justice never ends only in destruction, but in renewal. Raphael's virtue, temperance, guides the transition, ensuring that what remains is not devoured by despair. Uriel, the watcher, the flame that does not flicker, is often linked to the upheavals of sun, moon, and stars. Revelation speaks of a third of the stars falling, of the heavens darkening, of cosmic order unraveling. These are Uriel's domains, for he was the one who warned Noah of the flood and held the secrets of the earth. In the apocalypse, his diligence ensures nothing escapes divine review. Sloth falls asleep, but Uriel watches. His light does not falter even as the cosmos convulses. Zadkiel, Chamuel, and Jophiel are not named directly, yet their virtues flow through the text like hidden rivers. Zadkiel's chastity is revealed in the imagery of the bride of the Lamb, purity preserved even through tribulation. Chamuel's charity pulses in the promise that God will wipe away every tear, a love that remains even at the end of time. Jophiel's kindness gleams in the vision of the New Jerusalem, adorned like a bride, radiant with beauty that lifts all rather than envies any. Though their names are absent, their virtues are written into Revelation's very rhythm. What emerges is a vision where the 7 archangels are not bystanders, but active participants in the apocalypse. Michael strikes. Gabriel announces. Raphael heals. Uriel reveals. Zadkiel preserves. Chamuel comforts. Jophiel adorns. Each plays a part, not as isolated figures, but as facets of heaven's final reply to evil. The sins that have haunted humanity, pride, wrath, gluttony, lust, greed, sloth, envy, are answered one by one, virtue by virtue, archangel by archangel. And what is most striking is how their roles balance destruction with restoration. Revelation is not simply about endings. It is about beginnings. The archangels reveal that judgment is never arbitrary, but purposeful. Fire is followed by healing. Trumpets of wrath are followed by songs of joy. The dragon is cast down so that a new heaven and new earth may rise. The 7 archangels embody this paradox. They are fierce yet tender, terrifying yet merciful, warriors yet healers. They are heaven's full expression when history reaches its climax. Thus, in the apocalypse, the 7 archangels reveal their true stature. Not vague ornaments of stained glass, not distant whispers of mystical lore, but living forces who hold the balance of creation. They stand until the very end, and through them, heaven's final victory is announced, enacted, and embodied. The 7 archangels, as luminous as they appear in Christian imagination, do not belong to one tradition alone. Their names and virtues shimmer across a wide range of beliefs: Jewish, Christian, Gnostic, and Islamic, each culture clothing them in slightly different garments, yet always preserving the sense of their immense authority. This cross-pollination of imagery and meaning is what makes the story of the seven archangels so enduring. They are not frozen in one text or one sect. They are, rather, symbols that transcend boundaries, reshaped by mystics and theologians in every age. In Judaism, the seeds of their presence appear early. Michael emerges in Daniel as the protector of Israel, while Gabriel speaks as God's messenger. In the intertestamental literature, especially the Book of Enoch, 7 are named as those who stand before the throne: Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Raguel, Sariel, and Remiel. Though the list varies, the pattern of 7 is consistent, suggesting a complete circle of heavenly authority. In later rabbinic writings, these names are invoked in prayers, sometimes inscribed on amulets for protection. To Jewish mystics, the archangels were not distant abstractions, but guardians who hovered close to human life. Christianity inherited this tapestry and added new layers. Canonical scripture gave prominence to Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, while apocrypha and mystical visions introduced others. The early church, cautious about over-systematizing angels, avoided definitive lists. Yet, in art and devotion, 7 figures emerged again and again. The medieval West sometimes honored Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Chamuel, Zadkiel, and Jophiel. Eastern Orthodoxy preserves slightly different names, such as Raphael, Jophiel, and Barachiel. Yet across differences, the number 7 held. To Christians, the archangels were both guardians of nations and exemplars of virtues. Divine agents who stood at the threshold between heaven's majesty and earth's need. Gnostic traditions offered still another lens. For some sects, archangels were not simply messengers, but emanations of divine fullness, sparks of light opposed to the rulers of darkness. In their cosmologies, the 7 represented harmony, a corrective to the corrupt archons who imprisoned humanity. Here, Michael might stand not only as a warrior, but as a liberator of souls. Gabriel might not only announce, but awaken. Raphael might not only heal bodies, but free spirits. Though unorthodox, these visions enriched the symbolic web, showing how deeply the 7 virtues resonated with those who longed for restoration. In Islam too, archangels stand in luminous ranks. Gabriel, is the supreme messenger who delivered the Quran to Muhammad. Michael, is associated with provision, bringing rain and sustenance to the earth. Israfil, often linked with Raphael, is destined to blow the trumpet of judgment. Azrael, the angel of death, guards the threshold of mortality. While the exact alignment of names differs, the resonance remains: angels of light, agents of God's will, bearing tasks that mirror both virtue and judgment. Islamic tradition, like its Abrahamic siblings, perceives these archangels as not passive but active, moving between heaven and earth with authority. What unites all these traditions is not uniform doctrine, but shared symbolism. Across them, the archangels embody the bridge between the infinite and the finite. They are beings who both guard the divine and touch the human. Whether they are named 7 or 12, whether their roles shift from healing to judgment, the heart of their symbolism is constant. They are figures of order, virtue, and divine will, breaking into the chaos of the world. Scholars, cautious as always, note that the variation of lists suggests human imagination at work more than rigid revelation. But mystics answer differently. The very diversity proves their richness. Angels are not limited by one tongue or one text. They appear in many forms because the needs of humanity are many. Some need Michael's strength, others Gabriel's patience, others Raphael's healing. Some hear them as guardians of nations, others as whispers in prayer. The forms shift, the virtues endure. And perhaps that is the point. The archangels are less about the precision of their names and more about the truths they embody. Whether 7 or 12, whether Michael or Metatron, whether Chamuel or Barachiel, the underlying message remains: heaven has not abandoned the world. For every shadow there is a light. For every sin a virtue. For every downfall a guardian who lifts. Across traditions, the symbolism converges on this truth: that humanity is never left alone, but always watched, guided, guarded, and invited higher. Thus, the 7 archangels, though shaped by different voices, emerge as universal figures. They reveal not only the richness of Abrahamic faiths, but the deep human longing to personify virtue, to see goodness not as abstraction, but as presence. In them, kindness has wings, humility has a sword, patience has a voice, diligence has a flame. And across traditions, the message shines. The divine still moves, still guards, still restores, through angels whose names may differ, but whose light remains the same. The story of the 7 archangels does not end in Revelation, nor in the mystical texts that named them, nor in the stained glass that cast their images into cathedral light. It endures because their meaning has always been more than historical. They are not just figures of the past, but living reminders of the choices humanity faces each day. Pride still tempts, humility still saves, wrath still burns, patience still steadies, greed still clutches, charity still opens its hand. Envy still corrodes, kindness still heals, lust still consumes, chastity still preserves, gluttony still devours, temperance still restores, sloth still drifts, diligence still endures. The 7 archangels are less about celestial bureaucracy and more about a moral architecture, pillars of light standing against shadows that are as present now as in any ancient age. To see them as symbols is not to diminish them. Symbols, when alive, shape lives. A child who looks at Michael's flaming sword learns that humility is stronger than arrogance. A pilgrim who contemplates Gabriel's quiet presence learns that waiting can be as powerful as action. A soul who prays to Raphael in sickness learns that balance heals as deeply as medicine. Symbols are not empty. They are bridges between heaven and earth. The archangels, whether one imagines them as real beings of fire or as timeless archetypes, fulfill this role. They translate virtue into form. They give faces to qualities. They make invisible truths visible. And in their faces, humanity sees itself. For what are angels, if not reminders of what we are called to be? Not flawless, but faithful. Not mighty by nature, but mighty in purpose. Not exalted by pride, but exalted by service. The archangels are not alien intrusions. They are reflections of virtues that live, or could live, in us. When Michael bows before God, he reminds us that humility makes us strong. When Gabriel waits with patience, he reminds us that restraint can transform fury into wisdom. When Raphael heals, he reminds us that balance is health. When Zadkiel restrains Abraham's hand, he reminds us that love is sacred. When Chamuel leans close in sorrow, he reminds us that charity is presence. When Uriel holds the flame through long night, he reminds us that diligence is endurance. When Jophiel smiles at another's light, she reminds us that kindness is abundance. Perhaps this is why their stories, though inconsistent across traditions, never vanish. They answer something deep in human longing, the desire to know that heaven not only commands from afar, but participates, intervenes, walks with us. In their virtues, we see not just heaven's reply to hell, but heaven's nearness to us. And in their names, we find reassurance that the battle between sin and virtue is not fought alone. The modern world, so different from the deserts of Israel or the monasteries of Europe, still feels their relevance. Pride still whispers through ambition. Wrath still smolders in politics. Greed still shapes economies. Lust still saturates culture. Gluttony still devours in countless forms. Sloth still numbs hearts. Envy still corrodes through endless comparison. And in each of these, the virtues embodied by the 7 archangels still offer a way forward. Not easy, not instant, but enduring. So perhaps the final mystery is this. The 7 archangels stand not only as guardians of heaven's order, but as invitations. They do not only protect, they call. They do not only fight, they inspire. They do not only embody virtue, they beckon us to embody it too. In this way, they are not merely heavenly figures, but eternal reminders. And as the story fades, let it fade gently, like the light of stained glass at sunset. Imagine them not vanishing, but lingering. Michael with sword lowered, Gabriel with trumpet silent, Raphael with staff at rest, Zadkiel with chalice glowing, Chamuel with heart radiant, Uriel with flame steady, Jophiel with golden smile. They do not depart. They wait. They wait as reminders that virtue, though quiet, never dies. That even in a world consumed by sin's noise, there are still voices of patience, hands of charity, hearts of kindness, flames of diligence, shields of humility, balances of temperance, and sanctities of chastity. The 7 archangels are more than names in apocrypha. They are heaven's architecture, heaven's memory, heaven's reply. And in remembering them, we remember ourselves. Not as creatures chained by sin, but as beings capable of virtue. The choice is ours, but the reminder is theirs. We are never alone. So as the narrative closes, let it do so not in finality, but in invitation. Close your eyes, breathe softly, and let the thought linger. That somewhere, whether in the highest heavens or the quiet corners of your heart, 7 archangels still stand, not as distant myth, but as enduring reminder. Let the pace slow now, as though the story itself is folding its wings. The fire of battle dims, the trumpets fall silent, the healing hands rest. What remains is a quiet rhythm, steady and reassuring, the sense that the world, though troubled, is still held in light. Imagine the 7 archangels not in distant skies, but standing near, their presence less thunder than warmth. The sword of Michael no longer blazes, but glows softly, like an ember in the hearth. Gabriel's voice is not proclamation, but whisper, patient as breath. Raphael's staff is not raised in urgency, but rests as a walking stick beside a friend. Zadkiel's chalice shines faintly, reflecting mercy. Chamuel's heart glows in rose light, warm and tender. Uriel's flame burns low but steady, a lamp in the night. Jophiel's smile softens envy into contentment, a quiet beauty that reassures the soul. Let this image stay with you. For the sins of the world are loud, but the virtues are quiet, and yet it is the quiet that endures. The 7 archangels remind us that virtue may not clamor, but it sustains, it heals, it protects. Their presence is like a slow tide, shaping the shore not with violence, but persistence. And as you rest, remember, for every shadow there is a light, for every hunger a balance, for every fury a calm, for every despair a hope. The seven stand still, patient and eternal. And in their standing, you are not alone.